Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
Families don't fall apart when people die. Nah, they show you they were broken all along. I knew it the second I pulled up to Uncle Eddie's mansion, a sagging brick beast tucked behind a row of dying maple trees, the kind that looked pretty once, but now just dropped leaves like they were giving up on life altogether. The driveway was jammed full of shiny SUVs and battered pickup trucks, every single one screaming, "I showed up to get mine." I killed the engine of my beat-up Ford and just sat there for a second, breathing in the ugly truth of what was about to go down. Inside, the vibe was thick enough to cut with a butter knife. Fake hugs, plastic smiles, whispered insults dressed up like jokes. Yeah, it was all here, just like I remembered from Christmases and Thanksgivings past, only now it was supercharged with greed. My Aunt Linda, still wearing too much perfume and that fake-ass smile, floated across the room toward me like some damn cruise ship. She gave me a squeeze that lasted just long enough to make her look good and not a second longer. "Amanda, sweetie," she sang out, already scanning the room over my shoulder for someone more important. "We're so glad you could make it." "Yeah, sure." About as glad as a cat is to see a dog. The room itself looked like it hadn't been touched since the late 80s. Mustard yellow walls, floral curtains, glass animal figurines crammed onto every surface like they might come alive if you stared too long. Uncle Eddie never gave a damn about decor. He cared about his fishing trips, his cars, and, secretly, even if he never said it out loud, me. That little fact I kept tucked real close to the chest. I wandered toward the food table, a sad affair with congealed meatballs and a veggie tray where the ranch dip had already formed a skin. Someone had brought grocery store cupcakes, the kind with icing so bright it looked radioactive. I grabbed one because having something in your hands makes it harder for people to corner you. Not that it worked. Kelsey, Aunt Linda's daughter, materialized out of nowhere, phone clutched in one manicured paw, snapping selfies like she was at a wedding instead of a goddamn will reading. "Can you believe this turnout?" she chirped without even waiting for me to answer. There must have been like 57 people crammed into a room built for 30. It was closer to 20 people, tops, but Kelsey was never strong in the math department. I bit my tongue so hard I almost tasted blood, choosing instead to nod and stuff half the cupcake in my mouth. Then it happened, the thing I didn't expect, but should have. Aunt Linda, standing dead center by the grand piano like she owned the place, laughed a little too loud, a sharp sound that made a few heads swivel. "Well," she said, voice dripping with fake charm, "we all know who's getting everything." Her gaze swept the room, daring anyone to challenge her, then settled on me for half a second, just long enough to make my stomach twist. The room buzzed like a hive of angry wasps, people murmuring and laughing nervously, but I stayed still. I didn't take the bait. I just smiled like I knew something they didn't. Because I did. See, 2 weeks before Eddie died, unexpectedly but not shockingly, considering the way he smoked and drank, we had a talk. It was after a god-awful family barbecue where Linda spent the whole afternoon complaining about Eddie's taste in women, his business choices, even the damn way he grilled steaks. I found him afterwards sitting on the porch, staring out at the dying garden he never had time for. He said to me, almost offhandedly, "You know, Mandy, the Real sharks ain't in the ocean. They're right here in the family. You ever wonder why I kept you at a distance?" I had, many times. He patted my hand like an old man would, rough and quick. "It wasn't 'cause I didn't care. It's 'cause I didn't want to dirty you up with all this." At the time, I thought he was just drunk and maudlin. Now, watching Aunt Linda's smug, punchable face, I wasn't so sure. The lawyer, Mr. Pike, shuffled through the room just then, carrying a thick folder tucked under one arm. He was an old bulldog of a man, hair gone gray, face permanently creased into a scowl, the kind of lawyer you hired when you wanted something done quietly but thoroughly. He cleared his throat loudly, and the noise level dropped by half. "All right, folks," he barked, "if I could have your attention." People started drifting toward the long dining table, setting down their paper plates and plastic cups, pulling chairs out with scraping sounds that set my teeth on edge. I moved too, finding a seat across from Aunt Linda, who smiled at me like a crocodile. Mr. Pike laid the folder down with a heavy thump that seemed to shake the whole damn table. He opened it, pulling out a thick sheaf of papers, and that's when I saw it. 2 envelopes. Not 1. 2. Nobody else seemed to notice, too busy pretending they were there to pay their respects, and not just to fight over the scraps of a dead man's life. But I saw it, clear as day, 2 identical cream-colored envelopes, one slightly thicker than the other. And just like that, I knew something Aunt Linda didn't. Whatever she thought was about to happen, she was dead wrong. The air inside the dining room was heavy enough to choke on, a thick soup of perfume, cheap cologne, and barely suppressed greed, hanging between all of us like a greasy cloud nobody wanted to acknowledge, but everyone was suffocating in. Mr. Pike shuffled some papers, cleared his throat with the kind of gravelly rumble that suggested he would rather be anywhere else, but stuck in a room full of vultures waiting for the feast to be served. He adjusted his glasses on the bridge of his nose, glanced around at all of us as if sizing up who was about to make the biggest scene, and then began reading. His voice was dry and professional, the tone of a man who had done this 100 times and knew exactly how ugly it was about to get. "I, Edward James Reed," he began, and already I saw Aunt Linda's face tighten in satisfaction, her painted lips twitching at the corners in a barely hidden smile. "Being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this my last will and testament." There was a collective shifting of chairs, a murmur running low through the room, the sound of bodies preparing for battle cloaked in civility. I sat back in my seat, arms crossed loosely, pretending to pick at a non-existent hangnail, looking every bit the picture of indifference. Inside, though, my heart hammered a furious rhythm against my ribs, because if there was one thing Uncle Eddie had taught me, it was that the show is always for the audience, but the real moves happen backstage. Mr. Pike droned on, listing off minor bequests, small sums of money to a few old friends, a mention of a donation to the local VFW hall that Uncle Eddie frequented but rarely paid his tab at, and then he got to the meat of it. To my sister-in-law, Linda Marie Reed, he read, and Linda sat up a little straighter, smoothing the wrinkles from her already pressed blouse. "I leave the entirety of my estate, including but not limited to my home, personal property, investments, and savings accounts, to be disposed of as she sees fit." There was a collective intake of breath, so sharp it might have sucked the drapes off the windows, and Aunt Linda, bless her fake little heart, actually clasped her hands together under her chin like she was starring in some low-budget soap opera. Kelsey squealed, a high-pitched sound like someone stepping on a chew toy, and clapped her hands in delight, already picturing herself posing for Instagram photos in front of Eddie's vintage cars. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted iron, but kept my face blank, maybe even a little bit hurt, like I was struggling to process the final slap in the face. Let them believe it. Let them savor their imaginary victory for just a few more minutes, because if Uncle Eddie taught me anything, it was that sharks circle best when they think the prey is weak. The room buzzed louder now, little ripples of congratulatory whispers and sidelong smirks. Aunt Linda, drunk on her own triumph, turned to me with a look that might have been mistaken for pity if you did not know better, and said, "Oh honey, I'm sure he left you something sentimental. Maybe that old fishing rod he was so fond of?" It took everything I had not to laugh in her smug, powdered face. Instead, my mind slipped back to that conversation on the porch, 2 weeks before Eddie keeled over during a poker game at Lou's bar, with a cigar in one hand and a losing hand of cards in the other. The sun was setting that night, bleeding orange and purple over the dying lawn, and Eddie, leaning back in his ancient lawn chair that creaked every time he breathed, had said to me in that gravelly voice of his, "You know, kid, the Real sharks ain't in the ocean. They're right here in your living room." He took a swig from his beer, crushed the can with one practiced hand, and tossed it expertly into a rusted trash barrel. "Blood runs thicker than water, sure. But greed? Greed is thicker than both. I had laughed then, not really getting it, thinking he was just being cynical, just being Eddie. But now, sitting there under the heavy chandeliers, staring at the polished mahogany table and the self-satisfied faces of people who never gave a damn about Eddie unless there was something to gain, I understood him perfectly. Mr. Pike cleared his throat again, this time a little louder, and I snapped back to the present. If there are no objections, he said, but even he looked uncomfortable, glancing down at the folder again, his bushy eyebrows drawing together in a frown. Well, proceed to finalize the reading. Aunt Linda sat back, crossing her legs primly, looking for all the world like a queen anointing herself ruler of the kingdom. Kelsey, practically vibrating with excitement, was already whispering to her mother about redecorating and maybe throwing a party to celebrate their new beginning, as if Eddie's body was not barely cold yet. Mr. Pike hesitated, his fingers brushing over the second envelope still tucked inside the folder. I saw it again, that second envelope, thick and ominous, and a cold thrill ran through me, a shiver that had nothing to do with the drafty old house and everything to do with the storm that was about to hit. Actually, Mr. Pike said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade, there's more. Dead silence fell over the room, the kind that made you hear every tick of the grandfather clock in the corner, every nervous shuffle of feet, every sharp, sudden breath. Aunt Linda's smile froze on her face, and for the first time that day, I saw a flicker of doubt in her heavily mascaraed eyes. There was more, and it was about to blow their little fantasy kingdom all to hell. The way Mr. Pike's hand hovered over the folder was enough to make the room collectively hold its breath, like a congregation awaiting some kind of twisted sermon they were not ready to hear. And for a moment it was so quiet you could hear the creak of the old grandfather clock laboring away in the corner. He slid out the second envelope slowly, almost reluctantly, and I saw Aunt Linda's eyes narrow, her hands clenching the arms of her chair so tight her knuckles bleached white under her fake tan. This second document, Mr. Pike said, his voice cutting clean through the rising tension like a hot knife through butter, was executed 2 weeks prior to Mr. Reed's passing, and it supersedes the previous will in all capacities. You could practically feel the electricity shoot through the room as that sentence hung in the air, too dense to just blow past, too heavy to ignore. Kelsey stopped chewing her gum long enough for her mouth to hang open like some dim-witted fish, and several distant cousins leaned forward like they thought they might physically catch whatever riches were about to spill forth. I stayed put, the picture of confusion and modest curiosity, while inside my heart hammered so loudly I thought maybe everyone could hear it, thundering away like some distant war drum. Mr. Pike broke the seal on the envelope, his face unreadable in that maddening lawyer way that either meant he had no soul left or had seen way worse family meltdowns than the one about to happen right here, right now. He unfolded the crisp pages and began reading again, his voice as steady as a man announcing the weather. I, Edward James Reed, he intoned, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all previous wills and bequests and declare this my true and binding testament. You could almost feel the collective tightening, the sucking in of breath as the room braced itself for the blow it somehow sensed coming. Mr. Pike did not drag it out, did not milk it for drama. He simply kept reading, as if delivering news about a grocery list and not about the incoming financial apocalypse for half the room. To my niece, Amanda Lynn Reed, he said, glancing up briefly before continuing, I leave the entirety of my estate, including the residence located at 147 Sycamore Lane, all personal property, all financial accounts, all investment portfolios, and the full rights to my automotive collection. The words hung there like thick smoke after a house fire, burning into everyone's ears and refusing to drift away. For a long moment, nobody moved, nobody breathed, the sheer weight of what had just been said pinning them all to their seats like butterflies on display, each one pierced clean through the chest. Then Aunt Linda moved, a tiny twitch of her mouth that betrayed the tsunami of rage boiling underneath that Botox-smooth mask. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out for a moment, just a little puff of disbelief, and then she barked out a laugh so brittle it sounded like glass shattering on concrete. "You cannot be serious," she said, voice shrill and sharp as broken metal. This is a mistake." Kelsey let out a choked sob, clapping a hand over her mouth like maybe she could stuff the ugly truth back in if she just held tight enough, and one of the uncles I barely recognized actually stood up, his chair scraping loudly across the hardwood floor, shaking his head in open disbelief. Meanwhile, I sat there, blinking slowly, still playing my part to perfection. The wide, shocked eyes. The slight, trembling hand brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. The whispered, "Oh my God," that could be either amazement or horror, depending on who heard it. Inside, though, I was burning alive with a wildfire made of every single slight, every dismissive comment, every shitty Thanksgiving where Linda had made me sit at the kids' table well into my 20s. Every time Kelsey had laughed behind my back about my pathetic little job at the diner. Every single moment where I had been reminded, in ways small and large, that I was nothing to them except a walking, breathing disappointment. And now? Now I was the queen of the ashes. Mr. Pike, undeterred by the way the room had practically detonated into raw disbelief, continued laying out the specifics, the cold, legalese hammering home every nail in the coffin. Stocks worth more than $2 million. A savings account fat enough to fund 3 lifetimes. Eddie's collection of vintage cars, which alone could fetch another $1 million if I cared to sell them. Everything. Every last damn thing. Linda surged to her feet, her chair crashing backward to the floor with a bang loud enough to make a few people flinch. "This is bullshit," she spat, her face mottling with fury. She manipulated him. She tricked him when he was vulnerable. Mr. Pike adjusted his glasses with glacial calm and said, "I can assure you, Mrs. Reed, that Mr. Edward Reed was of sound mind at the time of this signing. There are notarized documents, witnesses, and a full psychological evaluation confirming his capacity." Linda's mouth opened and closed a few times, a fish gasping for air on dry land, but no real argument came out, just more furious blustering. Kelsey was crying now, big ugly sobs that shook her thin shoulders, mascara running in thick black rivulets down her cheeks, ruining whatever airbrushed perfection she had applied that morning. One of the distant cousins muttered something about hiring a lawyer and contesting the will, and that lit the fuse Linda had been desperate to ignite. "We'll take this to court," she screamed, stabbing a finger in my direction, like she wanted to physically carve me out of the room. "You hear me, Amanda? You little snake. We'll drag your name through the mud until there's nothing left." I finally looked her dead in the eyes, smiled just the tiniest bit, and said, "You're welcome to try, Aunt Linda." But Uncle Eddie always did like a good fight. The room exploded into angry chatter and overlapping threats, the fragile facade of civility shattered completely now, every greedy, vicious instinct laid bare for everyone to see. And I sat there, calm as a stone, because unlike them, I knew what was coming next. They thought they could scare me. They were about to find out exactly how wrong they were. The thing about growing up as the family afterthought is that you learn early on how to survive by pretending you are harmless, pretending you are stupid, pretending you are so far beneath everyone's notice that they never even realize you have been sharpening your knives behind the scenes for years. So when Aunt Linda screamed threats across the room and Kelsey sobbed like someone had run over her little dog, I sat there looking small and overwhelmed, giving them exactly what they expected, all the while planning every move that would gut them without so much as lifting a finger in court. Mr. Pike packed up his papers and left as quickly as professional decorum allowed, clearly wanting no part of the meltdown unfolding behind him, and as soon as the door shut, the remaining family members closed in around me like vultures, their voices overlapping in a rising tide of begging, bullying, and greasy, desperate promises. Aunt Linda, surprisingly, was the first to pivot from rage to oily sweetness, sitting down beside me and placing her manicured hand on mine like we were old friends who had simply had a little misunderstanding over who should inherit a dead man's life savings. "Amanda, sweetheart," she cooed, her voice dripping so much fake sugar it made my teeth ache. "We all know Uncle Eddie wasn't quite himself toward the end. Surely, you don't want to tear the family apart over a little misunderstanding, do you?" I gave her my best wide-eyed stare, the one that had once convinced a security guard to let me out of a parking ticket when I was 19 and had zero money for the fine, and said, I don't know. Maybe we can work something out. Maybe if everyone just calms down a little." The bait was swallowed faster than a sinker in a pond full of starving bass. Kelsey immediately launched into a breathless speech about how she had always admired me, how she always thought it was so cool that I ran my own little business. Never mind that she had once called it pathetic in a very public Facebook post. And a few others chimed in, falling over themselves to suddenly be on my side. For the next few days, I let them play their game, dangling the promise of mercy just out of reach. Arranging a few fake family meetings at the mansion where they showed up in their Sunday best and tried to out-grovel each other while pretending they hadn't spent their entire lives treating me like something they scraped off their shoes. I served them coffee, nodded sympathetically, took notes like I was seriously considering which of them deserved a slice of the pie. All the while, I was sitting on a secret that was about to turn their world inside out. See, Uncle Eddie had not been a stupid man, no matter how much the family liked to pretend he was just a rough old coot who could barely spell his own name. He had been a suspicious bastard, especially toward the end, and he had left me something even better than money. He had left me insurance. Hidden in a locked drawer in his study, behind a false back that I only found because Eddie had drunkenly hinted at it during that last conversation on the porch, was a series of USB drives, each carefully labeled with dates and names. On them were recordings, hours and hours of conversations Eddie had captured during family gatherings, phone calls, casual visits. Recordings of Linda calling him a senile old fool. Recordings of Kelsey laughing about how she was going to spend that old bastard's money the second he dropped dead. Recordings of cousins plotting to move him into a home and sell the house out from under him. It was a gold mine of pure, unfiltered betrayal, and it was about to become my favorite weapon. I started slow, leaking a few of the juiciest clips anonymously to a few local gossip rags and social media groups where the Reed family still fancied themselves minor celebrities. Then I sent a few anonymous tips to reporters who loved nothing more than stories about rich families eating their own. Within days, the headlines started popping up like weeds after a rainstorm. Small-town heiress reveals family's shocking greed. Local businesswoman inherits fortune. Uncovers betrayal. Family feud. Dirty secrets behind the Reed legacy. Linda's charity board appointments started disappearing overnight. Kelsey lost her biggest brand sponsorship deals. Cousins found themselves disinvited from clubs and social events that had once kissed their feet. Their reputations burned faster than dry brush in a California summer, and there wasn't a goddamn thing they could do about it without exposing even more filth. The best part was that legally, they had no case. I made sure of that, combing through the small print with a hired shark of a lawyer who found a brilliant little loophole, because Eddie had recorded the conversations inside his own home where he had no expectation of privacy from his guests. The recordings were admissible if anyone tried to contest the will based on claims of manipulation or fraud. Contesting meant opening the door wide to discovery, meaning those recordings would become public record, available for every nosy neighbor and rival to enjoy. In short, if they sued, they destroyed themselves even more thoroughly. When Aunt Linda finally realized the trap I had laid, she tried one last time to corner me, showing up at the house uninvited, wearing dark glasses and a scarf like she was a damn movie star dodging paparazzi. She stormed into the sitting room where I was having coffee, yanked the scarf from her head, and hissed, "You think you've won, you little bitch?" I smiled, not sweetly, not warmly, but with all the cold satisfaction I had been forced to swallow for 30-some years. I don't think, I said, leaning back in the chair with deliberate laziness. I know. Linda stood there trembling with fury, wanting to slap me, to scream, to claw my eyes out, but she couldn't touch me without bringing even more shame and scandal down on what was left of her pathetic kingdom. She stormed out without another word, slamming the door so hard one of Eddie's stupid little glass animal figurines toppled off a side table and shattered into a million glittering shards. It seemed fitting somehow. Later that night, when the house was finally still and the walls no longer buzzed with angry voices or whispered plots, I wandered into Eddie's study, running my fingers over the cracked leather of his old armchair. I was finally alone with my victory, and for a minute, it tasted sweeter than any revenge fantasy I had ever dared to dream. But when I pulled open the bottom drawer of his desk, the same one I had rifled through 100 times before, I found something I had somehow missed. A thin envelope, yellowed with age, tucked so deep in the corner it practically merged with the shadows. Scrawled across the front, in Eddie's unmistakable shaky handwriting, were 5 words that stopped me cold. To whoever earns it. My fingers hovered over the paper, heart thundering in my chest again, not from fear this time, but from the terrible, thrilling sense that maybe, just maybe, the real game was only just beginning. For a long time, I just sat there staring at that envelope, the thick silence of the study pressing in on me from all sides, broken only by the slow, deliberate ticking of Eddie's old wall clock, the one that had marked every second of his lonely victories and stubborn regrets. The weight of those 5 little words, to whoever earns it, sank into my bones, heavier than any fistfight or courtroom battle I had ever imagined during those long, angry days after the funeral. It was not just a letter, not just some sentimental goodbye tucked away for a rainy day. It was a challenge, a final gauntlet thrown at my feet by the only man in this family who had ever truly understood how much dirt a person had to crawl through before they earned the right to stand tall. I cracked the seal slowly, half expecting the paper inside to disintegrate from age, but Eddie, being Eddie, had probably used a brand of stationery that could survive a nuclear apocalypse. His handwriting was familiar, crooked, and sprawling, filling the page with a raw honesty that hit harder than any polished speech could have. Kid, if you are reading this, it means you got through the first wave. Good. I knew you would, or I wouldn't have bet the farm on you. You're tougher than the lot of them put together, but toughness without purpose is just another way to rot from the inside. Here's the deal. Take care of those who deserve it. Burn the rest. Don't do it for revenge. Don't do it because you're pissed off. Do it because somebody has to stop the rot before it eats everything worth saving. You get to decide who's worth saving. You. Not them. Not some court. Not some preacher. You. If you screw it up, you'll just be another shark. If you do it right, maybe there's still hope for this messed up family after all. I sat there for a long time after reading it, feeling the burn of tears I would have denied until my dying breath, feeling the raw, scouring rage and tenderness that only someone like Eddie could conjure up in me. Because here was the truth, staring me dead in the face. This had never been about punishing Linda or Kelsey or the rest of them. This had been about seeing if I could rise above them without sinking into the same muck they lived in every damn day. The easy part would have been to keep everything, lock the gates, and watch them all rot in their own filth, knowing every meal they skipped, every party they were snubbed from, every miserable little moment of their downfall had been handcrafted by my quiet, patient vengeance. The easy part would have been to call it justice and sleep like a baby. But Eddie had known better. He had known that if I chose that road, there would be no coming back, no second chance to be better than the people who spent their lives trying to bury me under their petty, poisonous expectations. It took me 3 days to decide. 3 days of pacing the creaking floorboards of Eddie's old house, 3 days of rereading that damn letter until the words etched themselves into the inside of my skull. 3 days of fighting the battle between the girl who had once cried herself to sleep after being laughed out of the family Christmas party and the woman who now held the smoking gun of power and legacy in her hands. In the end, I made my move. I kept the house, of course, because there was something about its crumbling dignity and stubborn, outdated charm that felt like a middle finger to every plastic, cookie-cutter mansion my cousins had ever drooled over. I kept the stocks, too, because Eddie had spent a lifetime building that portfolio, brick by brick, and I was not about to let those sacrifices rot just because I got sentimental at the 11th hour. But the cash, the liquid gold they had all fought and schemed and lied for, I gave most of it away. Quietly. Anonymously. I funneled it into local charities Eddie used to scoff at in public, but quietly slipped checks to in private. The battered women's shelter on Main Street, the VFW hall where old veterans told taller and taller tales each year. The animal rescue that had once saved Eddie's mangy, half-blind dog from the kill shelter. I made sure not a single donation carried my name or Eddie's because it wasn't about polishing my reputation or buying redemption. It was about planting something new in the scorched earth Eddie had left behind, something that might grow if given half a chance. As for Aunt Linda and Kelsey, I made damn sure they found out about the donations, made sure it burned when they realized the money they had dreamed about, planned for, practically tasted, had slipped through their greedy fingers into the hands of people they would not have spat on if they were on fire. I sent them each a polite, formal letter on thick, expensive paper, thanking them for attending the will reading and informing them, in the coldest, most professional language possible, that their services as family members were no longer required. No threats. No insults. Just a quiet, surgical severing, the kind that hurt worse because it was clean and final, leaving no mess they could wallow in for sympathy. The night after the last letter went out, I stood on the front porch of Eddie's house, watching the sun dip low behind the trees, casting the sky in bruised purples and bleeding reds, the kind of sky that made you feel small and fierce all at once. I thought about Eddie sitting here, beer in hand, watching the same sunsets, thinking his stubborn, messed up thoughts about family and loyalty and whether anything good could survive in a world that seemed hell-bent on killing it. I thought about the sharks he had warned me about, how easy it would be to become one without even noticing until it was too late. And I wondered, no, I worried if maybe I had already crossed the line. Because the truth is, I didn't give that money away out of pure kindness. I did it to hurt them, to make sure they knew they had lost not just the battle, but the war. I could still see Aunt Linda's face, white with rage, and Kelsey's mascara-streaked sobs, and it filled me with a satisfaction so deep and dark it scared me a little. Maybe I had done the right thing. Maybe I had just become another shark, swimming in slightly cleaner water. Maybe it didn't matter anymore. The clock inside struck midnight with a hollow, final clang, and I stood there a little longer, letting the night wrap itself around me, feeling the weight of Eddie's legacy settle onto my shoulders like a crown or a noose. And in the end, I did the only thing I could do. I smiled into the darkness and let it keep its secrets.